Sometimes the worst moments of our lives become the doorways to our greatest blessings. What if I told you that accidentally destroying someone's most prized possession could lead to the most incredible transformation you never saw coming? Picture this: a young man struggling to make ends meet, working multiple jobs just to survive, makes one devastating mistake that should have ruined everything. Instead, it becomes the moment that changes not just his life, but the lives of countless others. This isn't just about money, success, or redemption. It's about how one woman's unexpected response to disaster created a ripple effect that nobody could have predicted. You're about to discover how a $20,000 designer bag, a moment of carelessness, and an extraordinary act of grace turned a minimum wage worker into someone who would impact his entire community. But the real shock? The CEO's secret reason for helping him will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about human nature. Get ready for a story that proves sometimes our biggest mistakes lead to our most beautiful beginnings. Marcus Williams wiped the sweat from his forehead as he pushed the heavy cart through the gleaming corridors of Meridian Tower, one of downtown Chicago's most prestigious office buildings. At 26 years old, he had calloused hands that told the story of someone who had never been afraid of hard work. But lately, even his best efforts didn't seem like enough. The janitorial job paid barely above minimum wage, and with his mother's medical bills mounting and his younger sister's college tuition due, Marcus often found himself working 16-hour days just to keep his family afloat. The morning had started like any other. Marcus arrived at 5 in the morning, 2 hours before most of the building's tenants would begin trickling in. He preferred these quiet hours when the only sounds were the hum of elevators and the distant murmur of early morning traffic 30 floors below. It gave him time to think, to plan, and sometimes to dream about a different life. But dreams, he had learned, were luxuries he couldn't afford. As he made his way to the 42nd floor, Marcus mentally reviewed his schedule. After finishing his shift here, he would rush across town to his second job at a small grocery store, where he would stock shelves until late evening. Then, if he was lucky, he might catch a few hours of sleep before starting the cycle all over again. His body ached constantly, but he pushed through the pain because giving up wasn't an option, not when his family depended on him. The 42nd floor housed Pinnacle Dynamics, a tech company that Marcus knew very little about except that the people who worked there wore expensive suits and carried themselves with the confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. He had cleaned their offices for nearly 2 years, moving like a ghost through their world of success and privilege. Most employees barely acknowledged his presence, which suited Marcus just fine. He wasn't there to make friends. He was there to work. But on this particular Tuesday morning, something was different. As Marcus approached the executive suite, he noticed that one of the corner offices was still occupied despite the early hour. Through the glass walls, he could see a woman in an elegant navy blazer, her dark hair pulled back in a sophisticated bun, speaking animatedly on the phone while typing on her laptop. Even from a distance, Marcus could tell this wasn't just any employee. Everything about her presence suggested authority and success. Marcus had seen her before during his 2 years of working in the building. She was always impeccably dressed, always focused, and always kind to the building staff. Unlike many of the executives who treated service workers as invisible, she made eye contact when she passed in the hallway and offered genuine smiles. Her name was Victoria Chun, and Marcus had overheard enough conversations to know she was the CEO of Pinnacle Dynamics. At 34, she had built her company from a small startup into a major player in the tech industry, and her success story was the kind that made headlines in business magazines. Marcus tried to clean around the occupied offices as quietly as possible, but the executive suite required thorough attention. The previous evening, there had been a company celebration, and the conference rooms needed extra care. As he worked, he couldn't help but notice the luxury that surrounded him. Original artwork adorned the walls, and the furniture looked like it cost more than Marcus made in several months. It was a different world, one that felt as foreign to him as another planet. When Marcus finally reached the area near Victoria's office, he noticed she had stepped away from her desk, probably to grab coffee from the kitchen area down the hall. On the credenza behind her desk sat a handbag that immediately caught his attention, not because he knew anything about designer accessories, but because it seemed to radiate elegance and craftsmanship. The bag was a deep chocolate brown with subtle gold hardware, and even to Marcus's untrained eye, it was clearly something special. Marcus set up his cleaning cart and began dusting the credenza, being extra careful around the expensive-looking bag. He had learned through experience that the wealthy placed enormous value on their possessions, and the last thing he needed was to damage something that probably cost more than his monthly salary. As he worked, he thought about his conversation with his mother the night before. The doctors had recommended a new treatment that their insurance wouldn't fully cover, and she had tried to hide her worry behind a brave smile. His sister Maya had called too, stressed about her upcoming semester and the financial burden she felt guilty about placing on the family. Lost in these worried thoughts, Marcus didn't notice when his elbow bumped against the edge of his cleaning cart. The cart shifted slightly, but it was enough to disturb the delicate balance of his supplies. A bottle of glass cleaner teetered on the edge, and Marcus lunged forward to catch it. In his haste to prevent the bottle from crashing to the floor, he knocked over a small container of industrial carpet cleaning solution. Time seemed to slow as Marcus watched helplessly as the bright blue liquid arced through the air and splashed directly onto the beautiful handbag. The chemical mixture immediately began to eat away at the leather, creating dark stains that spread across the surface like spilled ink on paper. The distinctive texture of the bag began to bubble and warp as the harsh chemicals worked their destructive magic. Marcus's heart stopped. He stood frozen for a moment, staring at the disaster he had just created, his mind struggling to process what had happened. The bag that had looked so pristine and perfect just seconds before was now ruined beyond repair. Dark chemical burns spread across the leather, and the elegant shape was already beginning to distort as the material reacted to the cleaning solution. Fighting back panic, Marcus quickly grabbed paper towels and tried to blot away the cleaning solution, but it was too late. The damage was done, and his frantic attempts to clean it only seemed to make things worse. The leather continued to discolor and bubble, transforming the once beautiful accessory into something that looked like it had been rescued from a fire. Just as Marcus was considering whether he should run away and pretend this had never happened, he heard the soft click of heels approaching down the hallway. Victoria Chun was returning to her office, and Marcus realized with growing dread that he was about to face the consequences of his mistake. His hands shook as he continued his futile attempt to repair the damage, knowing that nothing he could do would restore the bag to its original condition. When Victoria appeared in the doorway of her office, Marcus forced himself to turn around and face her. Her expression shifted from mild curiosity to shock as she took in the scene before her. Her gaze moved from Marcus's panicked face to the destroyed bag on her credenza, and, for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Marcus's mouth went dry as he struggled to find words. This was it. The moment that would likely cost him his job, and possibly result in a lawsuit he could never afford to fight. He thought about his mother's medical bills, his sister's education, and the family that depended on him. In one careless moment, he had potentially destroyed not just an expensive bag, but his ability to support the people he loved most. Victoria stepped closer to examine the damage. Her face unread. Victoria Chun set the damaged handbag down on her desk with a gentleness that surprised Marcus. He had braced himself for anger, for shouting, for the kind of explosive reaction that seemed natural when someone's expensive possession had been destroyed. Instead, Victoria's expression remained calm, almost thoughtful, as she looked between the ruined bag and the trembling young man standing before her. "What's your name?" Victoria asked quietly, her voice carrying none of the hostility Marcus had expected. "Marcus Williams, ma'am," he replied, his voice barely steady. "I've been cleaning this building for almost 2 years. I've never had an accident like this before. I swear to you, I am normally very careful. I don't know what happened. I was just trying to catch a falling bottle and—" Victoria raised her hand gently, stopping his frantic explanation. "Marcus, take a deep breath," she said, her tone surprisingly kind. "Accidents happen. I can see you're upset about this." Marcus stared at her in disbelief. This wasn't how these situations were supposed to go. In his experience, wealthy people protected their possessions fiercely, and any damage to their property was met with immediate demands for compensation and threats of legal action. The kindness in Victoria's voice seemed almost too good to be true, and Marcus wondered if this was the calm before the storm. "Ma'am, I need you to know that I will pay for this," Marcus said, his words rushing together. "I don't have much money, but I can set up a payment plan. I can work extra hours, take on more shifts. Whatever this bag cost, I will make it right. Please don't call the police. Please don't have me fired. My family depends on my income, and I promise I will figure out a way to replace it." Victoria studied his face carefully, taking in the genuine distress and desperation in his expression. She had dealt with many people over the years, and she had developed a keen ability to read character and sincerity. What she saw in Marcus wasn't the shifty evasiveness of someone trying to escape responsibility, but rather the honest anguish of a good person who had made a terrible mistake. "How much do you think this bag cost, Marcus?" Victoria asked, picking up the damaged item again. Marcus looked at the ruined handbag, trying to estimate its value based on its obvious quality and craftsmanship. Even damaged, he could see that it had been something special. The leather, despite being chemically burned, still showed signs of superior construction. The hardware, though tarnished by the cleaning solution, looked like real gold rather than cheap plating. "I don't really know much about designer bags," Marcus admitted. "But based on how nice it looks, maybe $500? $1,000? I honestly have no idea, but whatever it costs, I'll find a way to pay for it." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus could see her considering something. When she finally spoke, her words hit him like a physical blow. "Marcus, this is a Hermes Birkin bag. It cost $20,000. The blood drained from Marcus's face. $20,000. The number seemed impossible, incomprehensible. That was more money than Marcus made in an entire year, even working 2 jobs. It was more than his family's annual income. It was an amount of money so large that he couldn't even begin to imagine how he would ever pay it back. Marcus felt his knees go weak, and he gripped the edge of Victoria's desk to steady himself. $20,000 for a handbag. The revelation made him feel dizzy and nauseous. His mind raced through the implications of what this meant for his future, for his family's future. Even if Victoria allowed him to set up a payment plan, it would take him decades to pay off that kind of debt, assuming he could find someone willing to accept such an arrangement. 20,000. Marcus repeated weakly, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. "I had no idea. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to say. I don't know how I could possibly." But as Marcus struggled to process this devastating news, he noticed something unexpected in Victoria's expression. Rather than the anger or frustration he expected to see from someone whose $20,000 possession had just been destroyed, she looked almost sympathetic. There was something in her eyes that suggested this conversation was going somewhere Marcus hadn't anticipated. "Marcus, can I ask you something?" Victoria said, settling into her chair and gesturing for him to sit in the chair across from her desk. "Tell me about yourself. What's your story?" Marcus remained standing, too agitated to sit. "Ma'am, with respect, I think we need to focus on how I'm going to pay for this bag. My story doesn't really matter right now. Humor me," Victoria said firmly but kindly. "I'd like to understand who you are." Confused but seeing no alternative, Marcus began to share his story. He told Victoria about his mother's cancer diagnosis and the mounting medical bills that insurance didn't cover. He explained how his father had walked out on the family when Marcus was 18, leaving him as the primary breadwinner. He described his sister Maya's academic achievements and her dreams of becoming a doctor, dreams that depended on Marcus's ability to help pay for her education. As Marcus spoke, Victoria listened intently, asking occasional questions that showed she was genuinely engaged with his story. She learned that Marcus had been forced to drop out of community college after just 1 semester because he couldn't afford both tuition and his family's living expenses. She discovered that he had been working since he was 16, taking any job he could find to help support his household. "I work here from 5 in the morning until 1 in the afternoon," Marcus explained. "Then, I go straight to my job at Morrison's Grocery, where I stock shelves until 11 at night. On weekends, I do odd jobs, landscaping, moving, whatever people need. I know it doesn't look like much from the outside, but I'm trying to build something for my family." Victoria found herself genuinely moved by Marcus's story. In her position as CEO, She encountered many people who spoke about hard work and determination, but Marcus's sacrifices were real and immediate. He wasn't working towards some abstract concept of success. He was fighting every day just to keep his family above water. "What are your dreams, Marcus?" Victoria asked. "If money weren't an issue, what would you want to do with your life?" Marcus looked surprised by the question. "I don't really have time for dreams, ma'am. I'm just trying to survive." "Everyone has dreams," Victoria persisted, "even if they seem impossible right now." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering whether he should share something so personal with this stranger, even under these unusual circumstances. Finally, he spoke. "I used to want to start my own business," he admitted. "Nothing fancy, just a small cleaning company. I thought maybe if I could build up a client base, hire a few people, I could create something stable for my family. But that was before I understood how much money you need to start a business, how many connections you need, how the whole system works. People like me don't really get chances like that." Victoria nodded slowly, absorbing this information. She had started her own company from nothing, but she also recognized the advantages she had possessed: a college education, family connections, access to capital, and the confidence that comes from growing up in an environment where success was expected rather than hoped for. "Marcus, what if I told you that this accident," Victoria gestured toward the destroyed bag, "might not be the disaster you think it is?" Marcus looked at her with confusion and suspicion. "I don't understand what you mean." Victoria stood up and moved to the window overlooking the city skyline. From this height, the people on the street looked like tiny figures moving through their lives, each carrying their own struggles and dreams. She had worked hard to reach this office, but she also recognized the role that opportunity and privilege had played in her success. "I want to make you a proposition," Victoria said, turning back to face Marcus. "But before I do, I need to know that you're serious about wanting to change your life. I need to know that if someone gave you a real opportunity, you would have the courage to take it." Marcus felt a surge of hope mixed with fear. He had learned to be suspicious of offers that seemed too good to be true, but something in Victoria's manner suggested she was serious about whatever she was proposing. "I would take any real opportunity," Marcus said earnestly. "But, ma'am, I still owe you $20,000 for your bag. Whatever you're thinking about offering, that debt comes first." Victoria smiled for the first time since discovering the damn. Marcus stared at Victoria in complete bewilderment. The words she had just spoken seemed to hang in the air between them, defying his understanding of how the world worked. Work with her to build his dream business? It sounded like something from a movie, not something that happened to people like him in real life. "I don't understand," Marcus said slowly. "Ma'am, I just destroyed your $20,000 handbag. Why would you want to help me with anything? This has to be some kind of mistake." Victoria leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "Marcus, can I share something personal with you? Something I don't usually talk about in professional settings." Marcus nodded, still trying to process the surreal turn this conversation had taken. 15 years ago, I was working as a waitress at a small diner in Chinatown," Victoria began. "I had just graduated from college with a computer science degree, but I couldn't find a job in my field. My family had sacrificed everything to pay for my education, working multiple jobs, taking on debt they couldn't afford. I was sending out resumes every day, but no one wanted to hire a young Asian woman with no experience and a name they couldn't pronounce properly." Marcus listened intently, trying to reconcile this story with the successful, confident woman sitting across from him. "One evening, I was carrying a tray of food to a table where 3 business executives were having dinner," Victoria continued. "I was tired, stressed about my family's financial situation, worried that my college degree was worthless. I tripped on a wet spot on the floor and dumped an entire tray of food onto one of the men's expensive suits." Marcus felt a chill of recognition. "What happened?" "I was terrified," Victoria said. "The suit was clearly expensive, and I was already living paycheck to paycheck. I expected to be fired on the spot, maybe even sued. But instead of screaming at me, the man, his name was Robert Morrison, asked me about myself. When he learned I had a computer science degree, he offered me an entry-level position at his tech startup." "Just like that?" Marcus asked, hardly believing the parallel between their situations. "Just like that," Victoria confirmed. Robert told me later that he saw something in how I handled the crisis. Instead of making excuses or trying to blame someone else, I immediately took responsibility and focused on how to make things right. He said that kind of character was more valuable than experience. Marcus felt a flutter of hope, but he tried to keep his expectations in check. But, ma'am, that's different. You had a college degree, technical skills. I'm just a janitor who destroys expensive handbags. Victoria shook her head. Marcus, in the last 2 years, I've watched you work in this building. You arrive early, stay late, and treat every task with care and professionalism. When the regular cleaning crew couldn't come in during that blizzard last winter, you stayed overnight to make sure the building was ready for business the next day. When Mrs. Patterson from accounting had that heart attack in the lobby, you were the first person to call 911 and stay with her until the ambulance arrived. Marcus was surprised that Victoria had noticed these things, let alone remembered them. To him, they had just been parts of doing his job properly. I've also seen how you interact with other people, Victoria continued. You're respectful to everyone, regardless of their position. You've helped other cleaning staff when they were struggling with difficult tasks, even when it meant extra work for you. That tells me something about your character. But character doesn't run a business, Marcus protested. I don't know anything about accounting, marketing, managing employees. I wouldn't even know where to start. Victoria smiled. Those are learnable skills, Marcus. What you can't teach someone is integrity, work ethic, and genuine care for others. Everything else can be learned. She stood up and moved to a whiteboard on the wall of her office. Let me explain what I'm proposing, she said, picking up a marker. I want to invest in you, Marcus. Not just with money, but with mentorship, training, and business guidance. Victoria drew a simple diagram on the whiteboard. Here's how it would work. Instead of paying me back $20,000 for the bag, money I know you don't have, you would work with me for the next year to build your cleaning business from the ground up. Marcus watched as she outlined her proposal, still struggling to believe this was really happening. I would provide initial startup capital, Victoria continued, writing numbers on the board. Enough for equipment, licensing, insurance, and operating expenses for the first 6 months. In return, you would give me a percentage of the business, not as an investor looking to get rich, but as a partner invested in your success. But why? Marcus asked, his voice filled with genuine confusion. Why would you do this for a stranger who just destroyed your property? Victoria set down the marker and turned to face him. Marcus, success isn't just about making money. It's about creating value, building something meaningful, and lifting others up along the way. I've been fortunate in my career, and I believe that fortune comes with responsibility. She paused, seeming to consider how much to share. But there's another reason, something more personal. Do you remember what I told you about Robert Morrison, the man who gave me my first break in tech? Marcus nodded. Robert didn't just give me a job, Victoria said quietly. He changed the trajectory of my entire family's life. Because of his investment in me, I was able to pay off my parents' debts, help my younger brother through medical school, and eventually start my own company. One act of faith in a young person created ripples that affected dozens of lives. Victoria moved back to her desk and picked up a framed photo that Marcus hadn't noticed before. It showed a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a warm smile, standing next to a much younger Victoria at what appeared to be a business conference. Robert passed away 3 years ago, Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. Before he died, he made me promise that I would find ways to pay forward what he had given me. He said that the most important investment anyone can make is in human potential. Marcus felt a lump forming in his throat. The sincerity in Victoria's voice was undeniable, but the opportunity she was describing seemed too good to be real. What would I have to do? Marcus asked quietly. Victoria returned to the whiteboard. For the next year, you would work with me and my team to learn every aspect of running a business. You'd study with our accountant to understand financial management. You'd work with our marketing team to learn about building a client base. You'd shadow our operations manager to understand efficiency and growth strategies. She drew connecting lines between different boxes on her diagram. At the same time, you'd be building your own client list, starting small and growing steadily. We'd help you develop service standards, pricing strategies, and quality control systems. What about my current jobs? Marcus asked. I can't afford to quit working. You wouldn't have to, Victoria assured him. This would be a gradual transition. As your business grows and becomes profitable, you naturally reduce your other work hours. The goal is to replace your current income within 6 months and exceed it within a year. Marcus felt dizzy thinking about the possibilities, but also terrified of getting his hopes up only to have them crushed. Ma'am, this sounds amazing, but I have to ask, what if I fail? What if I'm not cut out for this? What if I waste your investment? Victoria looked at him seriously. Marcus, failure is always a possibility in business. But I believe the bigger risk is not trying at all. Based on what I've observed about you over the past 2 years, I think you have everything it takes to succeed. You just need someone to believe in you and give you the tools to succeed. She moved closer to where Marcus was sitting. But I need yo. Marcus spent the next 3 days in a state of emotional turmoil. Victoria's proposal replayed in his mind constantly, competing with practical concerns and self-doubt. He found himself distracted at both of his jobs, mechanically going through the motions while his thoughts churned with possibilities and fears. On Wednesday evening, as Marcus stocked shelves at Morrison's grocery, his coworker Derek noticed his unusual silence. Derek was a college student who worked part-time to help pay for school, and over the months, he and Marcus had developed a friendly working relationship. Man, you've been acting weird all week, Derek observed as they unloaded a delivery truck. You keep zoning out, and yesterday I swear I saw you talking to yourself. What's going on? Marcus hesitated, unsure whether to share Victoria's incredible offer. It sounded so unbelievable that he worried people would think he was delusional or making up stories to cope with his difficult circumstances. Hypothetically, Marcus said carefully, what would you do if someone offered you a chance to completely change your life, but you weren't sure if you could trust them or if you were good enough to succeed? Derek paused in his work and studied Marcus's face. Is this actually hypothetical, or are you asking for real advice? Maybe a little of both, Marcus admitted. Okay. Well, hypothetically, Derek said with a grin. I'd probably be scared as hell, but I'd also know that opportunities like that don't come along very often, especially for people like us who don't have rich families or fancy connections. That evening, Marcus sat at his kitchen table trying to help his sister Maya with her calculus homework while their mother rested in the next room. Maya was brilliant. Everyone who met her recognized her intelligence and potential, but the financial pressure of college was taking its toll on the entire family. Marcus, you seem distracted tonight, Maya observed as he struggled to focus on her math problems. Is everything okay? Marcus looked at his 19-year-old sister, seeing both their mother's determination and their father's quick wit in her features. Maya had dreams of becoming a doctor, specifically a pediatric oncologist, inspired by their mother's cancer journey. Those dreams required years of expensive education, and Marcus knew that his current income wouldn't be nearly enough to support her ambitions. Maya, what would you think if I told you I might have a chance to start my own business? Marcus asked, setting aside her textbook. Maya's eyes widened. Are you serious? What kind of business? Marcus explained Victoria's proposal, watching his sister's expression shift from excitement to concern to cautious optimism. It sounds amazing, Maya said when he finished. But it also sounds too good to be true. Are you sure this woman isn't trying to scam you somehow? I've been wondering the same thing, Marcus admitted. But I've seen her in the building for 2 years. She's a real CEO with a real company. I looked up her business online, and everything checks out. Maya leaned forward, her analytical mind engaging with the problem. What's the worst that could happen if you say yes? Marcus considered the question. I could fail completely, waste her investment, and end up back where I started. Maybe worse, if I quit my other jobs and then the business doesn't work out. And what's the worst that could happen if you say no? The answer to that question was obvious to both of them. If Marcus said no, nothing would change. He would continue working multiple jobs, barely making ends meet, watching his dreams fade a little more each day. Their mother's medical bills would continue to mount, Maya's education would remain a financial struggle, and Marcus would spend the rest of his life wondering what might have been. On Thursday evening, Marcus visited his mother in her bedroom. The latest round of chemotherapy had left her to understand something important. This isn't charity. This is a business partnership. I expect you to work harder than you've ever worked before. I expect you to be dedicated, teachable, and committed to excellence. If you're not ready for that level of commitment, then this isn't the right opportunity for you. Marcus thought about his mother's medical bills, his sister's education, and the exhaustion that had become his constant companion from working multiple jobs. Then, he thought about the possibility of building something real, something that could provide security for his family, and maybe even opportunities for others. What would happen to the money I owe you for the bag? Marcus asked. Consider it the cost of your business education, Victoria said with a slight smile. $20,000 is expensive tuition, but if it changes your life, it's worth it. Marcus sat in stunned silence for several minutes, trying to process everything Victoria had told him. This morning, he had been a janitor with no prospects beyond his current situation. Now, a woman he barely knew was offering to transform his life based on nothing more than a destructive accident and her assessment of his character. I need to think about this, Marcus said finally. This is the biggest decision I've ever had to make. Can I have some time to consider it? Victoria nodded. Of course. Take all the time you need. But, Marcus, I want you to remember something while you're thinking about this. Sometimes opportunities come disguised as disasters. Sometimes the thing that looks like your worst mistake turns out to be your greatest blessing. As Marcus prepared to leave Victoria's office, he realized that regardless of what he decided, his life had already changed forever. The question now was whether he had the courage to embrace that change or the wisdom to walk away from what might be an impossible dream. Aged bag. Actually, Marcus, I think we might be able to address both issues at the same time. But I need you to trust me, and I need you to be willing to step outside your comfort zone. The conversation was taking a direction that Marcus had never could have anticipated. An hour ago, his biggest concern had been finishing his cleaning route on time. Now he was sitting in a CEO's office, having destroyed her $20,000 handbag, and listening to her talk about opportunities and propositions. It felt surreal, like he was living someone else's life. But, as Marcus looked at Victoria's earnest expression, he realized that whatever was about to happen would either be the beginning of something extraordinary or the most elaborate setup for disappointment he had ever experienced. Either way, he had already passed the point of no return. The old version of his life, the predictable routine of working multiple dead-end jobs just to stay afloat, had ended the moment that cleaning solution hit the handbag. What kind of proposition? Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Victoria returned to her chair and leaned forward, her expression serious but encouraging. Marcus, what would you say if I told you that instead of paying me back for this bag, you could work with me to build the business you've always dreamed about? Blee. Marcus watched as she picked up the ruined bag, turning it over in her hands to assess the full extent of the destruction. The silence stretched between them, heavy with tension and unspoken consequences. Marcus knew he needed to say something, to apologize, to take responsibility, but the words seemed stuck in his throat. Finally, Marcus found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Ma'am, I am so incredibly sorry. I don't know how this happened. I was trying to catch a falling bottle, and I knocked over the cart, and the cleaning solution. His words tumbled out in a rush, each one sounding more inadequate than the last. Victoria looked up from the damaged bag and studied Marcus's face. He expected anger, demands for compensation, threats of legal action. Instead, he saw something he didn't expect, a flicker of understanding, perhaps even compassion. But surely he was misreading the situation. No reasonable person would react calmly to having their expensive possession destroyed by a careless janitor. The weight of his mistake pressed down on Marcus like a physical force. This wasn't just about replacing an expensive bag. This was about the reputation and livelihood he had worked so hard to build. In the cleaning industry, word traveled fast, and an incident like this could make him unemployable in every high-end building in the city. The thought of having to explain to his family why he had lost his job, why their already precarious financial situation had become even more desperate, made Marcus feel sick to his stomach. As Victoria continued to examine the bag in silence, Marcus mentally calculated how much the replacement might cost. Even if it was just a few $100s, that represented money his family desperately needed for other things. But, looking at the quality of the leather and the subtle designer details. Marcus suspected this was no ordinary handbag. The realization that he might have destroyed something worth thousands of dollars made his legs feel weak. The silence stretched on, each second feeling like an eternity. Marcus waited for the explosion of anger that was sure to come, for the demands and accusations that would follow. He prepared himself to beg for mercy, to offer a payment plan he couldn't afford, to do whatever it took to make this right. But Victoria's reaction was unlike anything he could have anticipated, and it would set in motion a series of events that neither of them could have imagined.